Many years ago, in the dark depths of Enugu's coal-laden valleys, a girl was born into the Ugbabe family. Ahebi's birth set off a tremor in the land, a spark that would ignite their simple lives and lead to unexpected riches. The Ugbabe were humble farmers, their pockets never overflowing with wealth, but brimming with joy from their children's laughter and the bountiful yield of their fields. Ahebi's mother, a cunning trader with a silver tongue and keen eye for opportunity, became a bridge between distant towns and their own, selling their farm's produce far and wide. But she didn't stop there. Sometimes she would even sell goods for other farmers for a small fee. Ahebi herself was a wondrous child, her beauty a rare gem that caught the attention of all who laid eyes upon her. With shimmering eyes like emeralds and skin that held the secrets of the night sky, she was a treasure more valuable than the coal buried beneath their feet. In the village she was known as Ormal Echa Unwa, meaning beautiful one. And beautiful she was, not just on the outside, but within as well. She had a kind heart that led her to help the elderly and play with the children. Gathered under the mango tree, she would regale them with stories from her travels with her mother to other villages. As she grew, Ahebi's grace only deepened, her movements fluid and elegant, like a swan gliding over water. By her 13th spring she carried the regal air of a queen and exuded the allure of the fabled maidens from ancient legends. Suitors from far and wide were already knocking on her father's door, drawn to her radiance like moths to a flame. But Ahebi had different desires. She wanted to marry for love, just as her parents had. However, fate had other plans for the young maiden. It was in the shadow of her burgeoning beauty that the land faced its darkest hour. An unforgiving drought seized the once fertile fields, turning them into barren wastelands. The people, once filled with hope and joy, now whispered desperate prayers for salvation. The king and elders of the village frantically consulted with the witch doctor, offering numerous sacrifices in hopes of appeasing the gods. But all their efforts were in vain. As the days turned into weeks without rain, Ahebi's father's farm slowly died before their eyes. Their crops withered and dried up, leaving them on the brink of starvation. In a desperate attempt to save his family, Ahebi's father defied tradition and sought out an Osu seeker. His decision was met with fierce opposition from his wife, fueled by fear and years of stigma towards the Osu people, causing their once peaceful household to erupt into a verbal battle. Ahebi could do nothing but helplessly watch as her parents fought for the first time. Confused and conflicted by the situation, she turned to her elder brother Amaka for answers. He had just returned home carrying a heavy gourd of water. "Emeka!" Ahebi cried out in desperation as she approached him. Her brother looked at her with concern. "All mal icha unwa, what's wrong? Your face looks like it has been listening to the mad ramblings of the village jester." Ahebi shook her head and let out a half-hearted laugh before turning serious. "I haven't," she replied, before asking the question that burned in her mind. "Why are the Osu people so despised?" Amaka let out a heavy sigh and set down the water gourd. "It all started long ago," he began gravely. "Those who broke the laws of Allah, the deity who ensured our community's prosperity, were deemed outcasts and banished from society to avoid calamity. These outcasts became known as Osu, and their descendants were punished for the sins of their ancestors. They were treated as inferior, sold into slavery, or even sacrificed to deities during festivals. They were shunned and forced to live in shrines or marketplaces away from real-born members of the community. And if anyone dared to defy a king's orders or community decisions, they too would be labelled as Osu, along with their entire family." "What happens if we're caught interacting with them?" Ahebi asked, her voice trembling with anxious curiosity. Amaka's solemn response was a stark reminder of the harsh consequences. Banishment, or worse, becoming one of them. With a heavy heart, Ahebi silently prayed for her father's safety and begged for him not to be caught by those who saw the Osu people as less than human. But fate had other plans. In the dead of night, Ahebi's father embarked on a perilous journey to seek forbidden knowledge from the Osu seer, a figure both revered and reviled, said to be touched by the gods but shunned by society. It was a desperate act of love meant to go unnoticed. But when he returned in chains, captured and disgraced, his fate was sealed. The Ugbabe clan gathered in the heart of the village, their faces etched with anticipation and fear. The usually bustling square now stood eerily silent, as if holding its breath for what was to come. The air was thick with tension as the village seer emerged, his eyes reflecting the weight of the moment. With a solemn gesture, he cast his kola nut onto the sacred ground and slipped into a deep trance. The beating of drums filled the silence, their rhythm echoing the pulse of the village. The chief priest and priestesses moved in a hypnotic dance of divination, their bodies swaying in perfect sync as they chanted ancient incantations. The drumming grew louder and faster, mirroring the rising anxiety of the clan, and then suddenly it stopped. The abrupt silence was deafening. All eyes were on the village seer as he spoke in a deep rumble that reverberated through the square. "A sacrifice is demanded by the spirits," he declared. "A sacrifice of pure love given willingly is needed to cleanse our land and restore balance." His words hung like a chilling prophecy in the air, sending a ripple of fear through the crowd. A sacrifice of pure love, a cost so high, yet the only hope for salvation. The fate of the Ugbabe clan now rested on one act of selfless devotion. Ahebi's heart pounded in her chest as she realised what this meant. She knew there was only one solution, one way to save her father and her people. But as she looked at the bound figure of her father in front of her, a mix of emotions swirled within her: sorrow, anger, fear. Before she could form any coherent thoughts, the seer turned his piercing gaze towards her. And in that moment, Ahebi felt like the gods themselves were looking into her soul. In a booming voice, he declared, "You, my child, are the chosen one. You must become the bride of the gods." The crowd erupted into gasps and murmurs, some filled with shock, others with disbelief. Ahebi's mother let out a cry of anguish, trying to shield her daughter from the seer's words. But it was too late. The gods had spoken, and their will was to be obeyed. The once bustling square was now a stage for destiny, and Ahebi's fate was sealed, a sacrifice for the greater good of her people. Ahebi stood frozen in place, her heart pounding in her chest as the seer's words settled heavily upon her shoulders. She could feel the weight of the village's expectations and the gravity of her fate as the chosen one. A life of solitude and servitude dedicated solely to the gods. As she took in the reactions of those around her, Ahebi felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She knew what she had to do for the sake of her family and her community. With a steely resolve, she met the seer's gaze and nodded slowly, accepting her role as the bride of the gods. The village erupted into a chorus of mixed emotions: awe, fear, reverence. Her mother wept openly, torn between pride for her daughter's bravery and despair at the sacrifice she was destined to make. Her father bowed his head in shame, knowing his actions had led to this moment of reckoning. The elders whispered amongst themselves, debating the implications of the seer's proclamation. Ahebi was taken to her father's compound to begin marriage rites. Her mother could not be consoled, while her brothers looked on helplessly. The traditional ceremony would be held under the light of the full moon, symbolising purity and divine blessing. The entire village was adorned with flowers and lit with torches, creating flickering shadows on the faces of the gathered crowd. As night fell, and preparations were made for Ahebi's transformation into the bride of the gods, the air was thick with incense and prayers. Village priestesses bathed her in sacred waters, anointed her with oils, and adorned her in ceremonial garments woven with symbols of divine favour. Silently escorted to the sacred grove where she would spend her days in communion with spirits, Ahebi knelt before the altar with a heavy but resolute heart. The seer stood beside her, chanting incantations and invoking the blessings of the gods upon their chosen bride. As dawn broke over the horizon, a beam of golden light pierced through the trees, illuminating Ahebi in a halo of ethereal radiance. The villagers gathered at the edge of the grove, their faces upturned in reverent awe at the sight before them. Ahebi could feel the weight of their collective gaze upon her, a silent chorus of hope and fear that surrounded her like a shroud. Closing her eyes, she reached deep within herself for courage and faith she never knew existed. In that moment of sacred communion, she felt a presence stir around her, a whisper of ancient power beckoning her to rise. With steady hand and heart full of resolve, Ahebi stood before the altar, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun promised a new beginning. The seer's voice rang out with authority as he proclaimed, "Behold the bride of the gods, chosen by divine will to serve and guide our people. May her sacrifice be a beacon of hope in these dark times, a testament to her courage and devotion." The villagers prostrated themselves in reverence as the seer revealed Ahebi, anticipating the promised union with their deity. But to their shock, it was not Ahebi who stood before them, but her mother, a desperate and tear-stained sacrifice in her daughter's place. Gasps of disbelief filled the sacred grove as the torchlight flickered over stunned faces. The high priest halted his chanting, his eyes widening in astonishment. At this unexpected turn of events, silence descended upon the gathered crowd, broken only by the soft sobs of Ahebi's mother. Then a low rumble of thunder rolled through the air, foretelling a coming storm. Hidden in the shadows, Ahebi watched with tears streaming down her face as her mother bravely took her place before the altar. Gratitude and sorrow swirled within her heart as she realized the depth of her mother's love and sacrifice. Undeterred by the disruption, the high priest continued with the ceremony under the watchful eyes of the village elders. Ahebi's mother stood tall, her determination unwavering as she performed the ancient rituals meant for her daughter. A crescendo of chants filled the sacred grove as offerings were made to appease their god. And just as thunder rumbled in approval, rain clouds gathered overhead, obscuring the light of the full moon with their dark embrace. In that moment, Ahebi knew that her mother's act of love had moved to something greater than themselves. As if answering a call from above, the skies opened up and unleashed a torrential downpour upon the parched earth below. But amidst this display of divine intervention and love, a sinister plot was brewing among those who were supposed to be guardians of their faith. The high priest, feeling threatened by his misinterpretation being exposed, declared Ahebi as wife to their deity and exiled her family from the village, a punishment that would haunt them for generations to come. The night of the ceremony had turned into a nightmare, leaving the village shrouded in a thick fog of fear and tension. As dawn broke, casting a haunting red hue over the sacred grove, the reality of Ahebi's new role as an outcast began to sink in. The villagers, still reeling from the rain that had saved their crops but brought destruction to their lives, were conflicted and wary. Ahebi stood before the altar, her clothes soaked and clinging to her trembling body as she watched her mother being taken away. The sight of her mother, shoulders slumped but steps resolute, left a searing pain in Ahebi's heart. She longed to run to her, to embrace her one last time, but the weight of the seer's decree held her in place. She could only watch in silence as her family was led away, their figures shrinking against the backdrop of the rain-drenched landscape. The once lively village square was now filled with hushed whispers and accusing glances. Ahebi's family, heads bowed and hands bound, walked slowly through the throng of onlookers. Pity and condemnation followed their every step like a dark cloud. Ahebi's father, once a proud farmer whose laughter echoed through their home, now looked defeated and broken. His eyes, filled with regret and sorrow, met Ahebi's for a fleeting moment, conveying a silent apology. Her brothers, Emeka and Chidi, flanked their parents with grim determination mixed with sadness. As they reached the edge of the village, the elders, led by the stern village seer, raised their voices in unison like a funeral dirge, pronouncing the family's banishment. Even the usually composed chief elder's voice wavered slightly as he spoke. For defying the gods and bringing disaster upon our village, the Ugbabe family is hereby banished. They shall not return until the gods themselves decree otherwise. The villagers, bound by fear and tradition, did not dare to protest, but the weight of the moment was suffocating. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and lingering echoes of the night's rain. Ahebi's mother, despite her own sacrifice, held her head high, her gaze locked on the path ahead. Alone now in the desecrated sacred grove, Ahebi knelt before the altar where her mother had stood just a day ago. The crushing weight of her mother's sacrifice and her own anger and determination pressed down on her heart. With tears streaming down her face, she made a solemn vow. "I swear," she whispered fiercely, "to honour my mother's sacrifice. I will find a way to lift this curse and bring my family back." A strange sense of calm overtook her then, as if the gods themselves had heard her vow. The rain had been a sign, a testament to her mother's pure love and the gods' approval, but Ahebi knew that relying solely on divine intervention would not be enough. She had to take action, to find a way to reclaim her family's honour and their rightful place in the village. With newfound determination burning within her, Ahebi rose to her feet and crept out of the grove. She snuck back into her father's compound and hastily gathered a bag filled with precious family heirlooms, before narrowly avoiding the king's security who were coming to seal up the compound. As she walked towards the edge of the village, she took one last look at the place she once called home, before disappearing into the dense forest fueled by determination and a desire for justice.